Month 9, January 2023. They had looked, and when the heat of anger that Aidan Drummond had disappeared, they had returned, despite having the prominent name of Limbury, and was potentially carrying around information that would lead him to Blackbeard. Nothing. Doesn't that strike you as odd? It was Cleo who voiced that opinion, as they sat under the cold stars, one mild Friday night. Pope huffed and his breath could be seen. That was unusual enough in itself. Maybe, report this to the police, he said to JJ, as he pulled at the floorboards for the dozenth time, and then threw the wood back, in defeat. A few grand's worth of weed, gone. Pope, Cleo and John B gave her pitying looks. And say what, Key? Sarah asked her, as JJ just stared. That a bunch of undeclared money and hash was taken? Heck, we shouldn't even be here. And yet we are, said Cleo, the peace weaver. It's a night given to us by God, under the stars, and it's just booty full. She was holding Pope's hand. He was pretending not to notice. The police are searching for him right now, John B said, looking around him, then glancing at his friends. All alone, on the run. At least when that happened to us, I knew we had friends around us. He took Sarah's hand, who beamed a smile to him. JJ said nothing. He had confided nothing in any of them after what he had found out, but the bitch had taken his money and his drugs, and none of them had found Aidan. She was gone. Charleston might well have been a place he would have gone. It had the Limbury connection, after all. But, even dead Phil, who had contacts in the police department in South Carolina, could find nothing on an Aidan Drummond, Limbury, or, with trepidation as he had suggested it, Routledge. So they had come back, and they had gone back to school, and JJ had forced himself not to get himself upset about not having a family for Christmas and no one inviting him over. He had not got upset in public, however. He had shed some tears lying bundled up in blankets looking at the sky on Christmas night. It might have lasted longer than the few minutes that he had made his head remember it to be. So they were together, and it was cold night, and they had lit a fire and were sitting by it, talking, laughing, bonding, Hoaglandia style. The only thing missing was the duck banner. Why did he even care? JJ could not explain it to himself. Aidan Drummond had robbed him, but Phil Howard had told JJ that he had been seen in Charleston, a fact he had not passed on to the rest of the Pogues. Why? Because he was keeping her secret? He had seen the outline under a vest top when he had torn Aidan's shirt, rounded and pert. The sight had stayed his hand. This girl was hiding her identity, and not very well. Why? Cockiness, or desperation? Those were the main reasons. And Aidan Drummond, from what JJ had seen, had both of those qualities in equal measure. Was she even John B's sister, after all? Or was that another lie? It was meeting a fellow con artist that interested JJ, he was loath to admit. CM on man, Pope had exclaimed. AB average is all very well, but I got to ace everything for the rest of the year to stand any hope of my scholarship. And you will, we all will, right? It was John B who was now, unusually, rallying them academically. They had sworn, JJ had to admit. But, for JJ, it was the down season, and jobs were hard to find. He was skint, and losing what Aidan Drummond had taken was a bitter blow. Hayward would have found himself short of a few food items, had he taken the trouble to look. But Pope's old man was raking it in from international tourists on the back of the Royal Merchant story. If he missed anything, nothing had come back to JJ. And, what about Rafe? JJ asked Sarah, as more beer was handed round. Is he still mad about what was taken? Doesn't seem angry at all. Sarah told him. We had Rose and Wheezy over from Guadalupe at Christmas. Whatever it was, it isn't bothering Rafe now. And you, John B, what do you think about having a brother? Cleo asked. All heads turned to her now. If he comes back, I'll talk to him, John B replied in his reasonable, untroubled manner. In the darkness, JJ shook his head, briefly, from one side to another. Even that, now. His best friend, who had been born with the gold hunting gene, seemed no longer interested in Blackbeard's gold. All of them had been truly oppressed by school. And while JJ could see the importance of keeping his head down, his effort was certainly not to be average. He was doing all he could to pass at a C, but not everything was a C. So a day or two missed wouldn't hurt. There was a job, a legitimate job, that Sammy Tunn had offered him. He cast his eyes to John B. Once, he would have been able to talk with him. Now, his best friend was convinced that a brother called Aidan Drummond was suddenly going to show back up in the OBX, and they would get together, become bros, and he would offer him a job in the surf shop, and life would be all hunky and all dory. And so JJ waited. Nevertheless, Aidan Drummond did not come back to the Outer Banks. Even with JJ slipping what last of the weed he had to Phil Howard for any tip-offs. John B didn't even seem interested in his father's connection to the famous gold treasure of Edward Teach anymore, the story so famous that every child in the Carolinas knew it before they got to school. Why? Was he being tamed by Sarah Cameron? Had he become too comfortable? These thoughts remained with JJ Maybank when, on the last night of January, Tunn had swung it in JJ's favor. $2,000 in his pocket for safe delivery, plus expenses for the return journey, of an 80-foot sunreef to a private key in Charleston. So he took it, and set out in the early hours of the month of February, as the sea mist took its time to clear. This was the best job of his life. And if John B did not care about this person, but until his half-brother, for God's sake, then it was up to JJ Maybank to find out just what had happened to the girl who was masquerading as a guy, under the name of Aidan Drummond. 88,888,888. Aidan had left Charleston on the morning after Christmas Day, or, he thought he had. Remaining as a guy was key. But it was as he waited for the first ferry of 26th December, Aidan realized he had what Renfield wanted. It had been used to wrap the remains of the money and stuff she had taken from JJ Mayfield's burned-out home. He had used it to wrap up his weed money. Yes. He shouldn't have taken it, nor the weed. But it was a tradable substance, and Aidan did not know what situation he might have been in where he needed it. Presumably John B had it and had given it to JJ, not realizing what it was. Or else he had just taken it. Carefully unwrapping everything and folding up the linen, then putting the money and drugs back in his holdall, Aidan Drummond did not return to Charleston's ferry port, but instead, turned and took the long walk back to King Street, to remain for the next 6 weeks as he, and her uncle Renfield, worked through all the clues they had about Edward Teach, the summer of 1517, the Queen Anne's Revenge, Charleston, and the gold.